And I want to be able to speak as someone also who works on the front line, who sees how these policies and programs are actually implemented and how they actually affect people.
All right, we're doing this. Heather, thank you for coming today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, a great time. Listen, you've worked for Ada County for 8 years.
Just about, yeah.
Awesome. You have a real inside track to what's going on in the department, or in the office rather. Why are you running? Because I'm sure you have a lot of other ways you could just beat your head against a wall without running for public office. But here you are doing it. So like, help me understand what's big for you.
Yeah, I feel like we've had a very similar voice with a lot of the people who have been in office in the commissioners lately. And I think there needs to be a different voice that comes to the table that is a little more open to maybe some out of the box ideas. I think when you have people that are so involved in politics in a lengthy capacity that sometimes you maybe get stuck in the one way to do things mentality and are maybe a little closed off to different avenues to try or different ways to do business. And I want to bring that to the table because I've been able to, in my role, step outside the box of what you would expect the recorder's office to do and offer different services to the public for both transparency, awareness, cost effectiveness, and utilize different technology and things like that, which I know how you feel about technology.
No, like I'm all for technology. I'm just not for technology with a 10-year-old.
Right.
Right. Like that's it.
But so utilizing that, and I want to be able to speak as someone also who works on the front line, who sees how these policies and programs are actually implemented and how they actually affect people. And I think that when you're writing things down on paper, making decisions for certain things, it sounds really good at first, but then when you actually go to put it into practice, that's where you see, oh, we didn't think about this, the unintended consequence of things. And I want to be able to bring the views of someone who has seen those and bring it to the table. And, hey, have we considered this? Have we thought about this group that this might be affecting more?
Gotcha. I'm very curious because I'm all about creativity. I've never actually had a job. I've always been self-employed. I've always found, niches and value I can add in things. And generally they're very atypical, right?
Yeah.
The people are like, I would have never thought you could do that, but like somehow you're doing that. Yeah. So do you have any examples of those, of things you're kind of like, well, look, we did this, but I really think we could have explored that, or there was an opportunity here, something like that?
Yeah. So we launched right after COVID. I'm sure everyone, when you were locked down with COVID, knows the title lock commercials that just kept going on and on and on about deed fraud and theft, and someone's going to come and just steal your property from you. And that's a real fear for people, especially, those vulnerable groups of citizens that now I just paid off my home, so I don't have a mortgage company that's going to use all their time and resources to fight something if it's, unjustly done.
Right. You don't have that built-in legal department.
Yeah. And so now it's you that is responsible. And that's a real fear for people. And then you have this program that is charging people $50-something a month to monitor their deed. And so we brought in the same exact program and we don't charge any residents for it. So you can monitor your deed. It'll basically be you sign up for the service. We call it the recording notification service. You sign up for it. You put variations of your name that could be shown on a document. You can do your parcel number on it. And if anything were to record with your name, we will notify you so that you'll get an email saying, hey, a document recorded with your name or your parcel number on it so you can check it out. And then that way you have an immediate response to it, not something 6 months down the line when someone's knocking on your door. Oh, I just bought this property or.
Yeah, right. Bye-bye. Yeah, I actually I had an old neighbor who was a victim of title fraud, and they had purchased their house. They of course got the title insurance. So the guy's like, this is a total scam.
Yeah.
Like, they was really mad about it. And he almost didn't do. He's like, when's the last time? Blah. So he buys it. And then literally 6 months later, the FBI knocks on his door.
Yeah.
They're like, hey, you don't own this house, or like maybe you don't own this house. And he was like, oh my God. And then of course pointed off to the title insurance company, and they took care of it. So especially with people who do have the capacity to pay down, the vulnerable older group of people who are really subject to scams, especially digital scams and things of that nature. That's cool to hear that you guys put that into place.
Yeah.
MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.
So we put it into place. We don't charge the public for it. So in implementing it, we ended up spending about $19,000. My department is a revenue generating department. So we're not an enterprise fund with the county, but we do generate revenue. So I was able to justify spending some of this money that I didn't spend for buying new computers or whatnot and reallocating those funds over that way. But we don't turn around and charge the public for it because everyone should have the ability to access that knowledge. And with things like your deed or your mortgage all being public records, so John Doe from across the street can come over and look at any of that. It's another way for you to help protect yourself. So that's kind of an out of the box thing that we were able to do. And also to bring it to the public for no charge. And we assumed whatever maintenance cost and whatnot on that. That's one of the examples. Another thing that I've wanted to do with our system is I want to integrate GIS mapping into linking like your appraisal value from the assessors, your recorded documents, your treasurer's information, and integrate that. Our software system can't necessarily do that right now, but we're in the process of changing our recording system to be able to offer things like that. So really just working outside the box of what is seen as what you should be able to do, and trying to offer more services, really trying to build that trust in government. That's
interesting. Interesting stuff. On the topic of property, real estate development, the Ada County Commissioners are a big piece of development outside of city limits. For instance, Dry Creek Ranch, where we're sitting right now, obviously unincorporated Ada County. Different addresses for voting and the mailing and whatnot. But you're a big piece of this. One of the issues that people have talked about is, hey, there are these developments like this one that are getting developed close to, but not within city limits. So the cities are not, first off, the cities wouldn't have approved the development, or theoretically wouldn't have. Perhaps they didn't have. I shouldn't speak for them, but in some cases they're like, hey, look, it doesn't fit in our city. But these developments pop up outside of the city limits, so they don't get the tax revenue. But then all of a sudden you're relying on the city services. Like one snafu in Eagle was that the Eagle Parks and Recs Department, I think, who puts on like the Eagle soccer or something. They're like, look, the soccer team, or it was like soccer team or baseball team. There was one group, one league that they're like, this is totally over capacity, right? Like we don't have enough parks. We don't have enough coaches. We don't have enough to continue offering this. And a huge chunk of people are coming from outside of Eagle. And so they had to actually start giving priority to people in Eagle. So just an example of like, you're using services and using things within cities, but then the cities aren't getting the benefit from the tax base and stuff. So where do you see that going forward as far as the commissioners?
So this is where it's a hard thing, because obviously we want growth. We need more housing. We need all of that. But at the same time, we need to really reevaluate where is the infrastructure at, where are resources being allocated to, what's the quality of life being done. And I think that, so one of my platform issues is just smart growth. And I think that let me backtrack. I would like to see more cooperation between developers and the county or the cities or all of the above, and the different entities, and really highlight some of those infrastructures and building that up. Things like public transportation is next to non-existent outside of Boise, although I have seen some in Meridian, but things like that really limit people's access to things. I live in Cuna, and so the fact that like the VA will not come and pick up senior citizens to bring them downtown for appointments out there, that's an issue. And so now you're going to have an over influx of people in one area trying to maintain services like that as opposed to others. So I think just being smart about where are our resources going, what's the infrastructure like, what do our roadways look like, can it support adding 3 new developments? Because I feel like adding 3 developments with 1 lane each way roads is not good for that area.
Right.
You're not going to be able to support that kind of growth. Having things like youth sports, youth programming, the school systems, what is that going to look like? I come from an area where it's not uncommon to have 50 kids in a classroom. I don't want that for my child. And I think that we need to be more cognizant of these unintended consequences of just keep adding homes and adding more people into small areas.
Right. What do you, speaking of things like EMS services, right? Like, how do we manage this? Because we have, with the amount of growth, with the infrastructure lagging behind the growth and the population swelling, we have things like EMS services that are being left behind completely. They're either being way underfunded. There are some areas that are not funded at all, right? You have volunteer services, but that's a crucial piece of what keeps our communities safe and healthy, right? Like if you have a heart attack and you live in unincorporated Ada County and, your development was made in an area that was not necessarily considered or didn't take into consideration the strain already on the EMS service, and it takes 45 minutes to get you to the hospital. That's a travesty, right? Like that's terrible. How do we start managing some of those services, or how do we grow intelligently? Because you outlined the problem, which is, hey, we want growth, but we don't want 50 kids in a classroom. That's not great, right? The county commissioners aren't going to go to like West Ada or something or Valley View and just say, hey, you got to just. And like they have budget constraints as well, right?
Right.
How do we start managing these things like EMS and education, or at least considering them?
See, I think we need more people at the table making these decisions. I think that the head of EMS needs to be there to really lay out what the mapping looks like right now, where the contracts are, what the services look like, what the response times are for the areas, and let's figure out a better way to do that. Is that with more staffing? Is that with restructuring how we're approving business plans and plats and whatnot and signing off on that? How are we going to be able to provide the quality of life that our citizens deserve within this limited resource that we have?
Right.
And I think that in expecting one body to make those decisions is ridiculous. We need to include the people that are actually doing the work. And I'm very big about collaborative efforts. I'm not going to have all the answers for everything.
Sure.
I am very cognizant. I am not the smartest person in the room most of the time. But I am really good at putting together the best team of people and who is going to be the experts in this area. And I think we need to rely on them a lot more than just expecting, oh, well, we'll just sign off on this and the developers will figure it out, or we'll just add more impact fees, which I'm not against adding impact fees, but how are we going to use that?
Right. And the problem, obviously, impact fees are, like these one-time fees.
Right.
It's like, well, shoot, yeah, that was great then, but the strain on the system is a repetitive cost. It's not a one-time cost. Right. Speaking of repetitive costs, the jail bond, right? Narrowly missed. I've had the good fortune of speaking with Sheriff Clifford many times, and he's it's horrible. I mean, obviously, we had the horrible tragedy recently with the sheriff's deputy, and before that, there was also a transportation issue where they were transporting somebody to hospital, and there was an ambush, and we don't live in an area where we can neglect law enforcement, and thank God our community does not. Right? That's not the sentiment that. You don't have the defund police movement here and things like that.
Not to the extent in other places, but.
Right. I'm sure you could find somebody who's like, take the money away. But like the majority of people that I've spoken with, including the chiefs of police, feel supported by communities, and that's great. But that doesn't mean we don't have to be vigilant, right? That's a big piece. Part of the issue with the jail bond is that people are just, it appears that they just they don't want to support in this way, or they feel like, hey, those are criminals. We should like let them sleep on the floor and eat breadcrumbs and stuff. It's like, well, part of the problem is that when you get arrested, you're innocent until proven guilty. So there is a certain portion of people in that jail that have not been convicted of a crime yet. Yeah, they might be charged with a crime, and the incidence of charging when somebody gets off or acquitted, it's like, okay, that's a smaller portion, but it's still part of the legal process. How do we fund the jail system, or do you feel that we are doing a sufficient job?
So it's kind of a catch-22, right? Because for what we have right now, yes, we're doing a sufficient job. However, it needs to happen. The jail bond needed to pass. It it had majority. It just didn't have the threshold it needed.
Right.
It missed by something like 1,000 votes.
Right. It missed by something like under 1%. It was really close.
It was so close. And it was one of those things where it's like, yeah, we didn't do that. And it's needed. It's not only needed for the residents of the facility, it's needed for officer safety, it's needed for disease control, it's needed for bringing things up to code, because you do need buildings that are up to code.
Right.
For all involved with it. It's not just that we want to hike your taxes up to hike your taxes up. And the hard part with the bond is, yes, it's going to be, realistically, it comes down to like a couple dollars per house.
Right.
And I know that couple dollars adds up. But it's needed. And if we continue to grow, if we continue to have people in the facility, and I know some of my fellow candidates have talked about, well, we need to send other, prisoners elsewhere, and the state needs to come and get there. But that's the thing. It's not as easy as just telling the state that you're going to rehouse these prisoners, or it's not as easy as just sending people elsewhere.
Right.
But I feel like a lot of the times we go into that default mode because we don't want to spend money of, let's just put a Band-Aid on it, and what can we put the Band-Aid on, and how can we, no, we need to be proactive. The growth isn't going to stop. So yeah, we do need to get this passed. And if we have to use foregone, we're going to have to use foregone. And as much as everyone hates that F word, it's not the worst thing.
Explain that process, if you would.
So I'll be the first to say I am by no means an expert on foregone. But my understanding of it is you have 3% that you can allocate to a capital improvement project that is a one-time use, and then an additional % for ongoing maintenance cost. I do know that there was legislation. I'll be honest, I'm not the expert with it. But yes, a one-time hike in the taxes and very little, 1% ongoing, I would much rather see on my tax bill and know that these needs are being met. And really, even with that little hike, it's again, dollars. Right. We're not talking crazy obscene amounts. But in talking about services, so like I said, living in CUNA, response times for fire departments will cause your homeowner's insurance to increase. So response times for EMS or for police officers will cause your homeowner's insurance to increase. So being able to provide services or build the facility that's needed to support the community, yes, it's going to, hike your taxes up a little bit at some point in time, but that is a needed service. And overall, the cost will even itself out.
Right.
And I'm probably one of the only people that will say that, because I know everyone else is so pro, let's cut the cost. I'm very big on let's reallocate where we can, though. There's plenty of line items in our budget that could be reduced by 1%, 2%, whatnot, or significantly over budgeted and not utilized every year. And we could just really be a lot smarter with our budgeting at the county level, and reallocate some of those funds to try to not increase taxes as much.
Right. And the first off, great explanation. One of the things that's interesting about we have to cut costs, there's a direct correlation between population and need for a jail and jail square footage, right?
Yeah.
That's just reality. If you have 10,000 people, you'll need a jail of a certain size. If you have 100,000 people, you'll need a jail of a certain size. It's going to be bigger. At no point can you grow a population of an area and then reasonably decrease the need for a jail facility. It just doesn't make sense. So yeah, I understand that some things can be renegotiated, some things can be made more efficient, but the jail system and need for police and things and deputies and things of this nature, that's a direct correlation to population, just because there's a certain portion of the population that will be criminals. That's just it. So yeah, I get what you're saying, which is, hey, look, it's great to want to cut costs, and it's great to look at the things that we can reduce expenses on when it's appropriate, but there are going to be some things that just flat out need to be addressed with increasing money.
And you have things you also need to think about other areas of it. We need courtrooms added. So for the amount of population you have, you're supposed to have so many judges, and those. I was
actually going to ask you about the courthouse. Yeah.
So those judges are going to need courtrooms.
Yeah. Right.
We a few years back did and not me specifically, but we as Ada County did a master facilities plan and kind of outlined the serious need for an administrative service only building, and really reallocating the courthouse to just a courthouse, because right now we're putting judges in closets And those are becoming courtrooms and chambers. And thankfully, you have things like you can do court online now, thanks to COVID. You know, we've really pivoted our thought of what is doable, but it's still not enough. You still need to be able to give people their day in court. You need to be able to allow people access to these services. And we need space to do that. Right. And unfortunately, needing space means needing additional areas, whether we restructure the current buildings, build new ones or whatnot. All of that is going to end up costing money, but it's kind of a give and take. And,
right. It's part of the judicial system.
Yeah.
Like you still got to have a courthouse that functions and services the area.
You know, and I respect some of my opponents where they're saying, you know,
you're doing this like what have other people said?
So one of the things that were said was, you know, by one of the opponents is, I don't want my name on the courthouse. I was part of the commissioners when the courthouse opened and I thought it was wasteful spending. Well, where were we going to go? That's truly the common sense question is, where was it going to go? Because by law, we have to provide these things for our public. And so, yeah, maybe at the time it was too large for the need, but we have quickly outgrown it. And it is not that old of a building to be so outgrown. And to where we're scrambling, putting people in closets. Broom closets have been converted into rooms and offices.
Is that a real thing?
It is a serious thing. I'm not even joking when I say that. That the need for space is insane. The need for parking downtown is ridiculous too. So we have the Triangle Lot, which at one time was great. Why that wasn't turned into a parking structure at the time the courthouse was being built, I'm not quite sure. I wasn't around the county at that time. But the growth has just expanded so much. And these things have to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
no one wants to hike taxes up. But at the same time, no one also wants to be in a lawsuit because you should have had something and provided a service and provided someone within their required time to have their case heard and not being able to meet those deadlines.
Right. Another big thing. Talk to me about Parks and Rec. Talk to me about, you know, Expo Center. Talk to me about all of these different things, because this is another like, hey, we like having Parks and Rec. Like we like, you know, open spaces. We like, there's a gentleman by the name of Burke Mantell who I found out about Burke because he's an older guy and he always talks about the BLM land and how it's not being policed or essentially watched over, and teens and other people go up there and they just kind of lay waste to it. So they'll like burn a bunch of pallets and like throw beer cans and stuff. And Burke is an avid outdoorsman, like huge. He's a lifer with like fishing game. And you know, I finally sat down with him eventually a few months back, and his positions were really fair. It's like, this is everybody's land. And it's like almost tragedy of the commons. Like somebody needs to step up and, you know, it's not saying we need to have patrols up there necessarily, but needs to be taken care of. This is a state resource that we all have access to. And it's unfair that certain individuals just go up there and essentially dump stuff all over it and just party away, and then don't, you know, especially not picking it, like there are couches and stuff that they like burned on, lit on fire. So what do we do with that?
See, that's the part where I think that we all need to be more collaborative. I feel like when I started with Ada County in 2016, there was a very, not necessarily a division, but I don't know a better word to use for it, but a very, this is my lane, I'm going to stay in my lane, that's your lane. One of the first things I did when I came on board is I got the state, my office, and the cities together. And we did an alcohol roundtable because my office does alcohol licensing, the state alcohol beverage control, and then the city's clerk's offices with the licensing. And we all got together and we realized that some of the processes were similar. Here's ways that we can cut extra legwork for people, to remove some of that red tape, because we're able to send things to people and interoffice them to each other, as opposed to making the customer come back, pick up a piece of paper to then walk over to the city buildings, things like that. So I believe that we need to get everyone at the table and figure out who can take what. Do I think it's necessarily the county's job to oversee all of it? No. But I think that Scott Coburg, who oversees the Parks and Recreation Department, would be a great person to figure out, hey, this is what we can do as far as resources. What can the state do? What can the cities do? And I think that those people all need to be at the table to have those conversations. Expo Idaho is another really good example of things. So my husband actually works over at Expo as one of their maintenance mechanics. And just in our regular talking, I can't believe that we haven't reinvested back into Expo to update buildings, to really make it a space that people are excited to come to. And the interim events get, great attendance and everything.
Sure.
But really, the buildings need to be updated. The buildings should be, I think of things in business mentality. When you have a business, you're reinvesting into your business a certain percentage of your revenue. And we should be updating and reinvesting into that. We should also be looking at that revenue stream because Expo is an enterprise fund. So it funds itself. And what's your revenue stream from fair? Interim events equal almost the same as revenue stream. So why are we not paying more attention to what your contracts look like? Why are you only charging 9 cents a square foot for your rentals? Could you be doing a better job to reinvest and to upgrade? And I feel like the community deserves things like that. But are those conversations happening? So those are things that I think being someone who works at the county, who sees these things from a firsthand perspective, I can bring those topics to the table. Whereas someone coming in from the outside that maybe doesn't realize things like that.
First off, thank you for that. There's a mentality that I paid really close attention to the 2024 legislative session.
Yeah.
It's really the first time because I've been doing so many different conversations with politicians and talking to people and working on things. Then I was like, okay, well, I mean, I guess this is like what I do now. I pay attention to like politics and bills and stuff. At least,
cool
yeah, so great. I just, man, it's just, that's the stage of life, right? Like when you're in your 20s, it's just like you're running hot. And now it's like, no, you're tracking the bills, like, because this is who you are. So one thing that's clear is there's a certain portion of people that are either senators or representatives that don't, their principle is if it adds $1, like we're not doing it. And that's their jam. They're like, we're going to vote no for absolutely everything. And then the rest of the people have to overcome that no vote and, best. And again, I'm not saying people don't have reasons for voting no or frequently voting no, whatever it might be. But do you think that that's a problem that the commission is experiencing where it's like you have people unreasonably shying away from additional expenses, even though there are appropriate things? Or do you think that people are shying away from expenses and investing in things because, for more valid reasons?
Well, here's the part where I'll say I'm not a very good politician because I think that my duty is to serve the people, not just the party. And I think that especially going into election time, people forget that. And my job is to you as the citizens. These are services that are not only expected, but required to be served for you. And we should be doing the best job that we possibly can. Sometimes that takes a little money and it's a very touchy subject, but the same people that don't want to spend money are the same people that expect response times to be within reason for emergency services. These are the same people that expect that when you have offenders that have been convicted of crimes that they're not being released early because we can't house them any longer. These are the same people that expect quality fare to be put on because that's a big deal for people in this area. That's a big attraction to go to. The Western Idaho Fair is awesome. We love supporting that. They expect quality though. The amount of people that after the last one, were like, oh, I feel like it could have been better. Well, yeah, if we reinvested more money into the area, yeah, we absolutely could have done better. But I think that everyone's so scared to spend a little money. And of course, it's taxpayer dollars. So it's this fine line of what's frivolous and what's needed. And it's that want versus the need. And I think sometimes people forget the need.
Yeah. Do you think there have been any frivolous expenses? Because, I mean, I'm sure you could make the argument. Well, let me just ask you that. Do you think there have been frivolous expenses?
I think there's been expenses that didn't necessarily need to go the way they did. I'm sure there's justifications for everything, but the fact that we bought newer Broncos, do we really need to go with a newer Bronco because that's the it car, or is there a specific reason? So I think really addressing things like that.
Wait, who bought the Bronco?
One of the departments bought some new Broncos as their work trucks. So trucks
as
were
their
needed.
Work truck?
Yeah.
from like Kendall Bronco.
I don't know where it came from. It wasn't my department. My department is inside the courthouse and we stay in there.
Can we discuss those Broncos for a second? Because not the ones that they bought, just the Bronco in general, like in the abstract. It's like the Bronco used to be so awesome. Like I saw an older white, really taking care of one the other day. I was like, that's it.
I had a buddy growing up.
Yeah.
And he drove one. It was, oh God, what year was it?
God, who cares? It was awesome.
It was awesome.
Back in the day, they were awesome. And now they're like $70,000, $80,000.
Yes.
And they look like, I mean, I don't want to offend any Bronco drivers, but the new ones they don't have the same glory and stature that the old ones have. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, the new ones, for the price tag that are on them, there's no way I would want to take that off-roading.
No.
And those were more of the rugged cars.
And the price is astronomical. Like,
can we just price for vehicles in general right now is insane. I already think the price for real estate is insane. I bought my home at $169,900 in 2016, and it could sell right now for $400,000. And I can't wrap my head around that because no part of me thinks that that should be $400,000.
Well, I had Representative Yamamoto in here last night, and she was talking about how Idaho is leading the country in economic growth. So we don't have the largest economy, but economic growth, we're leading the pack. And so it's kind of like, well, yeah, things are heating up there with the influx of people like myself, right? Yeah. With the influx of people that come in and either bring their jobs with them or start reinvesting immediately in the community, starting new businesses and offering services and stuff. It's like money's moving around. So it's unfortunate that things have gotten more expensive. But again, this is where the unincorporated developments come into play because it's like, okay, look, let's add more housing. It's such a catch. Just like, because nobody wants the more housing. Nobody wants the crowds. But at the same time, it's like, well, that's why the houses are going up in cost.
But here's the hard part, too. You add more housing, and that's not going to negate everything else. It's not going to solve the problem necessarily. So,
well, nothing's going to solve the problem of inflation.
Is there ways, right? But is there ways to work with the developers to potentially, and I don't have all the answers for this. This is just ideas. Like I would love to see if there's ways to partner with developers to do some type of grant program or whatnot. And 10% of every new development is what I would call working class housing prices, or take what the average, median salary of a person is and scale that cost of the home down to what that person should be able to afford. And is there a way to do that? And is there grants that can supplement? Because obviously they want to be made whole. That's their whole business plan. Right. But could we do something like that as opposed to just saying, well, let's just add more. Let's add more apartments. And
it's not solving the issue. This is a really interesting topic, though. All right. So look, you moved from California years back.
Yeah.
I moved from California. I get really itchy when people start talking about like going to developers and being like, why don't you, make 10% of your houses like more like if there was sufficient housing, like I don't know of and perhaps you do, but I don't know of a development where the developer's like, okay, I'm asking $500,000 for these, 500 houses. And the majority of people can't pay for that. So for these houses, I'm just going to stick it at 500,000 and wait. Right. Though that's not the case. It will be whatever the market will bear.
Yeah.
Right. And there aren't these large pools of housing options that are just sitting vacant while the developer or landlord or whoever waits for enough well-heeled patrons to come along and either rent the apartment or buy the house. Right. So I agree that having more housing won't solve the problem that our dollar is worth less every single day. Right. Just because that's the nature of inflation. But I do feel like the reason that housing is getting exacerbated is because more people are moving. Like it's anything, right? It's, hey, look, you have the cost of, you have a finite amount of something. If you have more people going after that thing, it's like the monopoly money. It's right. Like everybody starts going after Boardwalk and now it's worth like $2,000 instead of $400. So my point is, do you think that if we were able to successfully build more housing, that wouldn't significantly alleviate the housing crunch?
I don't. See, this is the hard part because it's all speculation right now. No one really knows. But I think with interest rates the way they are, that's really preventing a lot of people from buying. So people are turning to renting right now. You have rental properties or out-of-state companies like American Homes for Rent that have this crazy, just insane amount of rentals, and priced extremely high, because I don't know anyone that feels like spending $2,700 a month for a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom rental.
Well, depends on the school district.
Right.
Right.
Some people will.
Yeah, right.
But then you have, of course, the cost of materials, and that's not just going to go down by adding more. So it's this catch-22, and
Right.
it's really hard.
Right.
And like I said, I don't have all the answers for everything. And I know I'm not the smartest person in the room when it comes to the topic, but I think that in getting to a point where, aside from political affiliation, aside from which company is which, and having these kinds of conversations and seeing what the private sector could assist with, is there a way to solve some of these issues?
I appreciate that. One thing that after the 2008 housing crash that became very, very clear is Toll Brothers actually got widely criticized because they had built these like McMansion style houses, and then a lot of people foreclosed on them, and they're like, oh, blah, blah, blah. And, you guys should have taken less of a profit. And Toll Brothers actually turned around. They're like, okay, look, maybe Toll Brothers Corporation could have profited a little bit less, but our customers were also asking for gigantic houses. Yeah. So it's like, and they had data that were showing like, look, 20 years ago, we were building a house of this size, and now the house that people wanted was like 40% greater. So there is an aspect of, look, you're not going to be able to get the 4,000 square foot house for like $100,000 anymore. No. Right. And if people are wanting larger and better, it's going to cost more and more. So there is an aspect of, is there an affordable avenue that allows for starter homes, right? Because that's, in my mind, with real estate, always the daisy chain, which is, say, look, you get into the first place, you want to have a place that's reasonable, especially when people are first buying. Generally, they have children and things of that nature. So you want reasonably priced, affordable starter options in reasonable school districts that aren't super overcrowded, with reasonable services, things like that, but maybe not, like the 4,000 square foot house. Yeah.
And I agree. And I think that that's more of the demographic that people are looking for right now. I don't think that's necessarily the trade-off on what's available right now. Or maybe it was at one point in time, but now that same model that used to be the bare bones basic model and not the luxury one is now being priced at the luxury model's price tag. And it's difficult for someone, especially, I don't make a ton of money in my position. I could never afford to buy my home the way it is. And I live in a Hubble home, pretty basic model, no real upgrades in it. And I couldn't afford that. And I have a pretty decent job with the county.
Right.
So I think there's that little bit of a disconnect in terms of what people's wages are right now and what the housing market is. And it's not stacking up.
Right.
So you do have the out-of-state companies or the people moving from out of state that are snagging what's available, that the people that have lived here their whole lives and working in, the Treasure Valley area are not able to compete with.
Right. Right. And again, one of the reasons that I really disliked the place I moved from was because I realized, look, there's no starter home here. There's not going to be any dignity for, the middle class or people in their 20s that are like trying to just make it.
Well, and at this point, I believe there is no middle class anymore. Yeah. Or there's very few of people that can even call themselves middle class. And that's the hard part, because when you see $400,000 and $500,000 homes or dollar homes starting, that's not middle class anymore.
Right. That's not middle class. Yeah. Well, Heather, thank you for coming today. We've talked about a lot of things. Have I missed anything? Have I left anything out?
So I'll just bring up, I know people probably are wondering why I have not been so active as far as signage, things like that. I've been doing much more of a digital platform. Awesome. I feel like my consumer base or my group, my supporters are not the ones that are necessarily able to throw $1,000 at you for donations. And campaign stuff are very expensive, as I've learned lately. So that's one of the things that I keep getting asked, oh, well, do you have a website? I do have a website. It's heatherllutheridaho.com. I'm happy to interact with everyone. I've been going to as many candidate forums as I can, but the people that support me are the people that are going to work every day that are trying to figure out how they're going to pay their bills. And I want to be the voice for that group. And I know that they're not the ones that are going to be able to spend $1,000 for a candidate, because that's insane. That is absolutely insane. So you don't necessarily see a ton of signs or any signs at this point with me, but I am actively campaigning and I would love any and all support. really my whole purpose is to serve the public. I want people to trust the county. I want to continue bringing on these things. I'm so fortunate that I've been able to be with the clerk's office for almost the last 8 years. They just launched the ballot verification software, which is the first place in the nation to have something like that. So I've been able to see a lot of these really innovative things that have happened by thinking outside the box. And I really want to be able to bring that to the entire county, not just limit it to the clerk's office.
That's awesome. Well, again, as you said, HeatherLLutheridaho.com?
Yes.
Awesome. And I assume your email and contact is on there. So
yes.
people can reach out.
HeatherLutheridaho@gmail.com.
Do you have like an Instagram, YouTube?
I
What do you do?
I do. I have Instagram, I have Facebook, I have the website and email. And I'm responding to everyone too. So if you sign up for notifications or anything on the website or send me an email, that is me responding to you, not some team.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you for coming in. Thanks for what you're doing. And obviously you've worked with the counties for some time. So thanks for your service there and just good luck with the campaign.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.